When Daniel and Emily Hayes bought a long-abandoned farmhouse, it was supposed to be the start of a new chapter. But just 6 months later, deputies arrived for a welfare check, and what they found inside changed everything. It was April 10, 2018, when the Union County Sheriff's Office received a call from Emily's sister, Laura Jorge. She lived 2 hours away in Des Moines and told the dispatcher she hadn't heard from Laura or Daniel in several days. At first, she thought they were just busy with the renovation work they often talked about. But when both their phones went straight to voicemail for 3 days in a row, she became worried. She said it was unusual for them to go completely silent. Emily was normally in frequent contact with family, especially since moving to a rural area where most of her relatives couldn't just stop by. Deputies were sent to the address that Tuesday afternoon. The property sat 3 miles outside the small town of Creston, reached by a narrow county road lined with fields and scattered farmsteads. From the driveway, the old Dawson farmhouse looked much like it had when the couple bought it. 2 stories, faded white siding, chipped paint, and a roof that showed signs of wear. The front porch leaned slightly on one side, and weeds grew high around the base. The only recent change was a stack of new lumber and several unopened bags of concrete mix on the porch, likely for a planned project. 2 vehicles were parked in the gravel driveway, Daniel's pickup truck and Emily's older sedan. Both were locked. Deputies knocked several times at the front door but got no answer. They checked the back door and walked the perimeter. Curtains covered most of the windows, and there was no visible movement inside. When Daniel and Emily Hayes bought a long-abandoned farmhouse, it was supposed to be the start of a new chapter. But just 6 months later, deputies arrived for a welfare check, and what they found inside changed everything. The Dawson farmhouse had been built in the early 1920s and stayed in the same family for generations. The last member of the Dawson family to live there moved away in 2005 after a property dispute, according to court records. After that, it passed between a few owners, including an out-of-state buyer who never moved in. By the time Daniel and Emily saw it listed for sale in 2017, the house had sat vacant for more than a decade. Daniel Hayes, 29, worked as a mechanic at a garage in the neighboring town of Afton. Emily, 27, ran a small online business selling handmade crafts and seasonal decor. They had been married less than a year when they decided to buy the farmhouse. Friends said they wanted space and privacy, and the property's price, well below market value, made it possible to buy without taking on heavy debt. They knew it would require years of work to restore, but they saw that as part of the adventure. When they first moved in during the fall, they focused on making the kitchen and 1 bedroom functional. Emily documented some of their progress on social media: fresh coats of paint, a new bathroom sink, and their plans for a vegetable garden. The photos showed a mix of old and new, vintage light fixtures alongside new appliances. In February, one of her social media updates mentioned that they were still uncovering belongings left behind decades earlier, mostly broken or unusable items, and she compared the barn to a time capsule. The barn behind the house still contained tools, furniture, and boxes left by previous owners. Daniel told a neighbor he intended to sort it out once the weather was better. The property also had an unused silo, a small shed with a collapsed roof, and a large basement that they rarely entered in the first months. Neighbors described them as polite but private. They waved from the road but didn't often stop for conversation. One neighbor recalled mentioning to Emily that the Dawson place has a bit of history, but she didn't mean anything sinister, just that the house had been standing for a long time and had gone through different owners. By March 2018, Daniel and Emily were talking about renovating the basement. County records showed the space had once been flagged for moisture issues, and a heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs had been fitted with an exterior latch. Daniel told friends it would make a good workshop for his tools once cleaned out. On Friday, April 6th, They visited the local hardware store together. The clerk remembered them buying paint, heavy-duty gloves, and cleaning supplies. That same afternoon, Emily spoke with her sister, Laura. The conversation was casual, and they talked about garden plans and a new recipe Emily wanted to try. Emily also mentioned they had begun clearing the basement, noting that much of what was stored there appeared untouched for decades. Laura recalled that she sounded upbeat and relaxed. That call was the last confirmed contact anyone had with her. By Monday, April 9th, Laura hadn't been able to reach Daniel or Emily for several days. She eventually contacted the sheriff's office to request a welfare check. Deputies found the property quiet, with no immediate signs of trouble, but their search would soon lead to an area the couple had only recently begun working on, a space that would later become central to the investigation. In the weeks leading up to their disappearance, the couple had been steadily moving from smaller renovation projects to larger ones that required more time and effort. The early spring weather made it easier to work outside, so they focused on clearing brush along the fence line and repairing the sagging section of porch that had been unstable since before they bought the property. Daniel had also patched small leaks in the barn roof using salvaged metal sheets, a job he worked on over several evenings after finishing at the garage. Inside the house, they had already completed most of the painting they had planned for the upstairs bedrooms. Emily was in the process of sanding and refinishing a small dresser she had found in the barn, while Daniel had begun rewiring an unused outlet in the kitchen. Their progress was steady, with each weekend set aside for whatever project seemed most urgent. Neighbors occasionally noticed their activity from the road. Some remembered seeing them unloading lumber or bags of supplies from Daniel's truck. One man who lived half a mile away said that, from his own property, he could see lights on in the barn after dark, suggesting Daniel was working there in the evenings. There were no reports of arguments, unusual visitors, or disturbances on the property during that time. In mid-March, the couple began focusing more on the inside of the house. This included plans for the basement, which up to that point had been used only for storing a few sealed boxes and tools. The space was reached by a narrow set of stairs behind a heavy wooden door in the back hallway. The door was reinforced with a crossbar latch on the outside, and the wood showed signs of age and water damage. County inspection records from years earlier had described the basement as poorly ventilated and prone to moisture. According to the family, Daniel had been reluctant to work down there during the colder months because of the damp, musty smell. By late March, they decided to clear it out so it could be used for storage and possibly a small workshop for Daniel's tools. They planned to tackle the work in stages, first clearing the entryway, then removing large debris before assessing the condition of the walls and floor. Around this time, Emily wrote in a social media update that the basement door had been stuck for years and took effort to open. She noted that shelves still stood along one wall, coated in thick dust, with several wooden crates stacked in a far corner. Although she didn't share details, it was the first indication they had begun active work in that part of the house. That Friday, after a trip to the hardware store, Emily's final phone call with her sister confirmed they were working on the basement. Over the weekend, neighbors noticed both vehicles parked in the driveway, but did not see the couple outside. It is not known how much work they completed in those final days, and no one besides Daniel and Emily is known to have entered the basement during that time. When the usual updates and casual check-ins stopped, it did not draw immediate attention, but by the end of the weekend, their absence from calls and messages began to stand out to family. By Sunday evening, Laura began to grow concerned when repeated calls and messages went unanswered. She tried again on Monday without success. Deciding to check on them herself, she drove to the farmhouse early that afternoon. When she arrived, she saw both cars in the driveway. The front porch looked much the same as it had months earlier, except for the new stack of lumber and the unopened cement bags. She knocked on both the front and back doors, but received no answer. Walking around the property, she noticed tools and supplies in place, including a paint tray on the porch railing and a half-full bucket of water beside it. There were no visible signs of forced entry or disturbance. The barn was closed and the house windows were covered. She called their names, but heard nothing. After walking the perimeter once more, she returned to her car and left, assuming they might have gone into town or were visiting friends. Another day passed with no word. On Tuesday morning, Laura called the Union County Sheriff's Office to request a welfare check. She explained the situation to the dispatcher, stressing that it was unusual for them to be out of contact for this long. Deputies were sent to the property that afternoon. From the driveway, the scene looked unchanged. Both vehicles were still parked and the doors were locked. Nothing outside suggested an immediate emergency, though deputies did note piled-up mail in the box, a few packages just inside the screen door, and through one uncovered window, an open laptop on the kitchen table beside a coffee mug and a pair of work gloves. The yard itself looked undisturbed, with no footprints in the soft soil or tire tracks in the gravel other than the couple's vehicles. Deputies circled the house slowly, checking each door and window, but found no signs of forced entry or broken glass. Everything appeared still, almost as if the couple had simply stepped away in the middle of their work. After confirming with dispatch that there had been no recent contact with Daniel or Emily, deputies retrieved a spare key from a family member and returned to the back door. One officer stood watch while another unlocked it, announcing their presence before stepping inside the kitchen to begin a cautious search. The first rooms they checked, the kitchen, dining area, and living room, all appeared orderly, though signs of ongoing work were evident. Drop cloths covered some of the furniture, and painting supplies were neatly stacked against a wall. Upstairs, the main bedroom was tidy, with the bed made and personal belongings in place. The second bedroom was being used for storage, with boxes stacked to the ceiling in one corner. In the back hallway, they found the heavy basement door closed and latched from the outside. A faint, musty odor came from the seam between the door and the frame. On the floor beside it were a broom, a small pry bar, and an empty plastic storage bin. It appeared the couple had recently been working there, possibly preparing to move items from the basement. The deputies noted the secured door, but did not open it immediately. They finished searching the rest of the house, finding no sign of Daniel or Emily. With no clear indication of where they might be and no evidence of forced entry, the search turned toward the basement, the last part of the property left to check. The deputies stopped at the basement door, noticing the worn wood and the latch securing it from the outside. They talked briefly about whether to open it right away or wait for another officer, knowing that old enclosed spaces could have safety risks. One deputy stepped outside to radio for backup, while the other stayed in the hallway. A few minutes later, another patrol car pulled into the driveway, catching the attention of a neighbor walking his dog nearby. When all three were inside again, they prepared to open the door. The latch was hard to move and took some effort to unlock. The hinges made a loud creak as the door opened, and a stronger smell of damp air came out, mixed with a faint sour scent. A narrow wooden staircase went down into the dark basement, with steps that were uneven and worn from age. The lead deputy turned on his flashlight and started down slowly, testing each step before putting his weight on it. The other two followed, their lights moving across the room below. The basement was low, with concrete walls marked by dark stains. The floor was mostly bare, except for scattered debris and a few larger items stacked against the far wall. On the left side, old wooden shelves held dusty glass jars, most empty, and some with dried residue inside. A small workbench stood nearby, cluttered with rusted tools. On the right, several wooden crates were stacked too high, their lids nailed shut. Dust covered everything, and cobwebs hung from the beams overhead. The deputies moved carefully, checking each corner and space behind objects. Near the far end, one of their flashlights caught something that didn't blend in, a large tarp spread out on the floor, weighed down at the edges by paint cans and bricks. They took the items off the tarp and pulled part of it back. Underneath were two bodies lying next to each other. Both were fully clothed, and their size and clothing matched the missing couple, Daniel and Emily Hayes. The deputies stopped their search and called in the find. The basement entrance was secured, and no one else was allowed inside. From that moment, the scene was treated as a possible homicide. Within the hour, more officers, investigators, and the county medical examiner arrived. Crime scene tape went up around the property, and deputies were posted to keep people away. A command post was set up in the driveway to organize the work ahead. The medical examiner's first check showed the bodies were also partly covered by a smaller tarp under the first one. Both had been dead for several days, though the cool, damp basement had slowed decomposition. The clothing was intact, and there were no clear signs of a fight nearby. Close to the bodies, investigators found a metal toolbox, a roll of twine, and a heavy flashlight lying on its side. The position of the items suggested they may have been in use shortly before the deaths. The basement was documented carefully. Everything, the crates, the workbench, the shelves were photographed before being touched. Nothing obvious linked the shelves to the deaths, but the crates were marked for later review. While the forensic team worked below, other deputies checked the upstairs rooms, attic, and outside areas again to make sure nothing had been missed. They also spoke with neighbors, though no one reported hearing or seeing anything unusual in recent days. By late afternoon, the bodies were removed and taken to the county morgue for autopsy. The basement was sealed off as an active scene, with only authorized staff allowed inside. Investigators planned to come back the next day to open the crates and continue the search. Outside, the number of patrol cars and the bright yellow tape began drawing the attention of passing drivers. Some slowed down to look, and deputies extended the barrier closer to the road. The sheriff gave a short statement to reporters, confirming that two bodies had been found, but not releasing a cause of death. Back in the house, technicians collected fingerprints from the basement door, the stair railing, and the workbench. They also took swabs from certain surfaces and gathered samples of the dirt and debris under the tarp. The tarp itself was sent for testing. Later, the medical examiner confirmed the bodies were Daniel and Emily Hayes. Both had been dead for several days before being found. The cool, damp basement had slowed decomposition, and while no official cause of death was released, early findings pointed away from natural causes. With the confirmation that the remains belonged to Daniel and Emily Hayes, the case became a full homicide investigation. Detectives shifted their focus from figuring out what had happened to uncovering who was responsible and why. Over the next several weeks, they worked methodically, piecing together the couple's last known activities, going over evidence from the farmhouse, and speaking again with anyone who might have seen or heard something in the days before the disappearance. The medical examiner's early findings placed the likely time of death between April 7th and April 9th. The cool, damp conditions in the basement had slowed the natural process of decomposition, but both bodies had clearly been there for several days before being found. While the exact cause of death would depend on toxicology results, investigators stated there were no obvious signs suggesting natural causes. Detectives gave special attention to several items discovered near the bodies. One of the most notable was an old ledger with a worn brown leather cover. Inside, the pages were filled with names, dates, and amounts of money, along with symbols that investigators didn't recognize right away. The writing was faded, but still readable. The ledger was sent to handwriting experts and financial crime specialists to see if the entries could be tied to illegal activity. A small stack of black and white photographs was also collected. The pictures showed men standing next to vehicles and farm equipment. None of the photos had labels, but several appeared to have been taken at the same farmhouse and barn, though both looked much newer in the images. The sheriff's office later released some of the photos to the public, asking anyone who recognized the people to contact them. 3 aged envelopes were also recovered. Each contained a folded letter. The handwriting was different from the ledger entries, and the paper had yellowed with age. The contents appeared personal, possibly letters between family members or close associates, but investigators sent them for further review to confirm their significance. Detectives then began looking into the property's ownership history. County land records showed that the farmhouse had been owned in the late 1970s by a man named Carl Weston. Weston had a criminal record, including charges for illegal gambling and possession of unlicensed firearms. While he had avoided long prison sentences, he had a reputation in the area for being involved in activities that were never fully proven in court. Weston left the county in the mid-1980s and was believed to have moved between neighboring states, often using different addresses. Although there was no clear evidence linking the ledger directly to Weston, several of the names written in it matched known associates from his years in the area. This raised the possibility that Daniel and Emily may have uncovered something tied to the property's past, something that could have put them at risk if the wrong person learned about it. When investigators revisited neighbors, some shared memories that added small pieces to the puzzle. One older resident said the farmhouse had been empty for decades after Weston left, passing through different owners but never undergoing major renovations. Another neighbor remarked that locals generally avoided the property, claiming it had a history, though they couldn't give specifics. A third noted that Daniel and Emily had recently been seen working more toward the back of the property, but had not spoken with them directly. Detectives also spoke again with family and friends. Laura Hayes repeated her account of the last phone call she had with Emily. In that conversation, Emily had been upbeat, talking about their plans for the basement and other projects. She gave no sign that she or Daniel felt unsafe. With no immediate suspects, the investigation widened. Detectives checked for any recent visitors to the area who might have had a reason to be near the farmhouse. This included delivery drivers, service workers, and contractors. They also reviewed security camera footage from local businesses in case Daniel or Emily had been followed or approached in the days before they disappeared. Several working theories developed. One was that the couple had found evidence of past crimes on the property, possibly in the form of financial records or incriminating photographs, and that someone connected to those events wanted the material destroyed. Another was that the farmhouse itself had been used in the past for illicit activity, and someone with ties to that history had returned. A smaller set of theories looked at other possible disputes. Investigators considered whether the couple had disagreements with anyone connected to their renovations, such as contractors or suppliers. So far, however, no evidence supported this line of thought. By the third week of the investigation, several items had been sent to state and federal labs for analysis, including the tarp that had covered the bodies, the roll of twine, and the metal toolbox. Investigators hoped that fingerprints, DNA, or other trace evidence might match someone already in law enforcement databases. The toxicology report was eventually completed, but it was not released to the public. The official cause of death remained undetermined, which left detectives without enough information to narrow their focus to a single suspect or motive. The sheriff's office stated that all possibilities were still being considered, and no one had been ruled out. As the investigation continued, detectives also took a closer look at the farmhouse itself. They examined crawl spaces, attic areas, and outbuildings for any additional signs of hidden items or structural modifications from earlier decades. A few loose floorboards in an upstairs bedroom revealed a small empty compartment, but nothing inside tied directly to the case. Interviews with longtime residents brought up more about Weston's years on the property. Some remembered seeing unfamiliar vehicles parked there late at night in the early 1980s. Others mentioned rumors that the barn had been used for storing more than just farm equipment. None of this could be proven, but it added to the impression that the property's past might have been far from ordinary. Detectives stayed in contact with the Hayes family, updating them on progress while also warning that the investigation could take months or even years. Laura and other relatives made public statements asking for information from anyone who had seen or heard something unusual in the days before April 7th. By early summer, the sheriff's office had collected hundreds of tips, but many led to dead ends. Some callers claimed to have known Weston decades earlier, while others thought they recognized people from the old photographs. Each lead required time to verify, and most produced no direct connection to Daniel and Emily's deaths. The medical examiner's findings reinforced earlier reports that the couple had been dead for days, and their deaths were not from natural causes. With the bodies confirmed as Daniel and Emily Hayes, the case became one of the most talked about investigations in Union County in years. For weeks after the discovery, the farmhouse was surrounded by yellow tape, with patrol cars posted outside day and night. Neighbors said it was strange to see the once quiet property become a constant hub of activity, with investigators, crime scene technicians, and even outside agencies coming and going. The sheriff's office issued several brief statements to the public, confirming that the couple's deaths were being treated as a homicide and that they were following multiple active leads. No further details were given about how the couple died or what might have led to their deaths. Investigators also declined to comment on the items found in the basement, including the ledger, photographs, and letters. Family members were left to piece together their own understanding of what happened. Laura Hayes spoke briefly to local reporters, describing Daniel and Emily as hardworking and kind, and saying she hoped whoever was responsible would be brought to justice. She and other relatives kept their focus on cooperating with law enforcement, attending every press briefing, and meeting with detectives when updates were available. In the weeks that followed, the property's history became a topic of public interest. Local newspapers dug into old records and published articles about the farmhouse's past owners. The most attention fell on Carl Weston, the man who had owned the property from the late 1970s to the early 1990s. His name had surfaced before in connection with suspected illegal activity, though no charges were ever filed. Some residents recalled hearing rumors about missing persons cases from that era, but nothing official linked Weston to any crimes. He had since passed away, leaving only speculation about what, if anything, Daniel and Emily might have discovered that connected to his time on the property. Detectives interviewed anyone who might have had contact with the couple in their last weeks. This included neighbors, contractors who had delivered supplies, and friends and family. While some provided helpful timelines, no one reported seeing anything unusual at the farmhouse in the days immediately before the couple went missing. No reports of strange vehicles, loud noises, or signs of forced entry were ever confirmed. Theories began to form, both among the public and within law enforcement. One possibility was that Daniel and Emily had uncovered evidence of past crimes during their basement work, evidence that someone wanted to keep hidden. Another was that they had been the victims of a more recent dispute, unrelated to the property's history. Detectives did not dismiss the idea of a targeted robbery, but the fact that valuables were left untouched in the home made that theory less convincing. Months later, the sheriff's office acknowledged that the investigation had slowed. Without clear forensic evidence pointing to a suspect, progress was difficult. DNA testing on items from the basement produced partial profiles, but none matched known offenders in the national database. Fingerprints collected from the basement door and nearby surfaces were either smudged, incomplete, or belonged to the couple themselves. As the investigation stretched into its second year, the case was classified as open but inactive, meaning it could be reopened at any time if new evidence emerged. Family members continued to speak publicly, urging anyone with information to come forward. Laura often described the lack of answers as the hardest part, saying that not knowing what happened was worse than hearing bad news. The farmhouse itself became a point of unease in the community. Some locals avoided driving past it, while others admitted slowing down to glance at the property, curious if anything had changed. Eventually, the house was sold at auction to an out-of-town buyer. The new owner declined to speak with reporters, and the property has remained unoccupied since. Today, the deaths of Daniel and Emily Hayes remain officially unsolved. The evidence points to foul play, but without witnesses, suspects, or clear answers, the farmhouse stands as a place of unanswered questions, and the Hayes case remains unsolved.